This is a homily for the solemnity of the body and blood of Christ. The first reading for this Sunday is from the book of Exodus, chapter 24, verses 3 to 8. The second reading is from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 9, verses 11 to 15. And the Gospel comes from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 14, verses 12 to 16, and verses 22 to 26. Although we are now in what the Church's liturgical calendar calls ordinary time, this Sunday we celebrate the second major solemnity following the end of the Easter season, the body and blood of Christ, or Corpus Christi, as it is known in Latin. In today's Gospel we heard Mark's account of the Last Supper. Jesus takes bread, says the blessing, breaks it, and gives it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." He then takes a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant, which is to be poured out for many." The earliest account that we have of the institution of the Eucharist is found in St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. St. Paul tells us that after Jesus had given the cup to his disciples, he told them, "Do this in remembrance of me." We find that same command in St. Luke's account of the Last Supper. "Do this in remembrance of me." And the Church has faithfully obeyed that command for 2,000 years. Whenever the priest recites these words of Jesus over bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ is present among us. We therefore refer to the consecrated bread and wine as the body and blood of Christ, or we may say that we have received Holy Communion. And Holy Communion is often referred to as the Eucharist, and sometimes as the Blessed Sacrament. When referring to the consecrated bread and wine as the body and blood of Christ, we are doing no more than taking Jesus at his word. "This is my body, this is my blood." The English word communion comes to us from the Latin words cum, meaning with, and unus, which means one. So communion means to be at one with, and that is precisely what happens when we receive the body and blood of Christ. We become one with Jesus. We read in John's Gospel that when the Jews started arguing among themselves, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Jesus tells them, "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood dwells in me, and I dwell in that person." The word Eucharist comes from the Greek verb Eucharistein, which means to give thanks. The central prayer of the Mass is called the Eucharistic prayer because it is the Church's great prayer of thanksgiving to the Father through the Son in the Holy Spirit. We often refer to the consecrated bread and wine as the Eucharist because the prayer of consecration occurs during the Eucharistic prayer. And Catholics often refer to the body and blood of Christ as the Blessed Sacrament. What does the word sacrament mean, and where does it come from? From at least the 2nd century, Christians used the word sacrament to refer to the rite of initiation. The rite of initiation refers to the sacraments of baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. When non-baptized adults are received into the Church, they usually receive these 3 sacraments together, as happens each year at the Great Easter Liturgy on Holy Saturday night. Christians in the early Church thought about the most appropriate name to give these rituals of initiation, and they came up with the Latin word sacramentum. The Latin word sacramentum referred to the sacred oath that a Roman soldier took. I pledge allegiance in this sacred oath to the Senate and people of Rome, to my general, and to the Emperor, that I will fulfill my conditions of service even to the point of death." In his book Doors to the Sacred, Joseph Martos offers this explanation about the use of the Latin word sacramentum. Christian writers in the 2nd century AD borrowed the term and used it to talk to their Roman contemporaries about the ceremony of Christian initiation. They explained that baptism was something like the sacramentum administered to new recruits. It was a ritual through which people began a new life of service to God. Then, as Christianity replaced polytheism in the empire, the original Roman usage of the word disappeared, and the Christian usage expanded. By the time of Augustine, in the 5th century, any sacred symbol or ceremony could be called a sacramentum. Although the word was still used primarily in regard to the ceremony of initiation, it could also be applied to blessings, liturgical feasts, and holy objects. Indeed, Augustine once defined sacramentum as a sign of sacred reality, and he noted that according to this general definition, anything in the world could be considered a sacrament, since all of creation was a sign of God. However, Christian usage in later centuries became more restricted, and by the 12th century the word was applied only to the 7 church rituals known to Catholics as the 7 sacraments. By the 4th century, people in the Western Roman Empire were predominantly Latin speakers, while those in the Eastern Roman Empire spoke Greek. In the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine relocated the capital of the empire from Rome to Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople. So Latin-speaking Christians in the Western Roman Empire used the Latin word sacramentum to refer to the Christian ritual of initiation. However, Greek speakers in the Eastern Roman Empire opted for the Greek word mysterion. I spoke about the etymology of mysterion last Sunday. The first part of the word comes from the Greek verb muo, which means to shut, and it refers especially to shutting the mouth or the eyes. The suffix terion means a place where something happens. It's not unlike our English suffix ium. So, for example, an auditorium is literally a place for hearing. A gymnasium is a place for exercise. A podium is a place where you stand. So mysterion means literally a place of silence, or a place where we are rendered speechless. Mystery, in other words, transcends the explanatory power of words. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas both define sacrament as a sign of something holy. The catechism that I had in primary school defined sacrament as a visible sign instituted by Christ to give grace. However, Catholic theology also understood that sacraments were a special kind of sign. They were effective signs. What do we mean by effective signs? In contemporary usage, signs convey information. Symbols are more ambivalent. They can be used to represent or stand for something else. Water, for example, could symbolize life. Without water, we would soon perish. When we refer to the body and blood of Christ as a sacrament, we are going beyond the meaning of both sign and symbol. Let me explain. Signs such as these, if they are to be effective, must be clear and unambiguous. In Australia, for example, the stop sign is not just a suggestion. It means that the driver must bring the vehicle to a complete stop and proceed only when it is safe to do so. Vehicles must stop and give way at a pedestrian crossing. However, the signs themselves do not have any intrinsic power to force the motorist to stop or give way. They can't, for example, disable the vehicle. Symbols by way of contrast to signs can be ambivalent. Water, for example, can be a symbol of both life and death. In a time of drought, there is no water, often with devastating consequences. But floods can also be devastating and destructive. So, no water, and we die of thirst. Too much water, and we may drown. Consider another symbol, the wedding ring. It is a sign of love and fidelity. The wedding ring represents a reality, but it doesn't embody that reality. So, for example, the couple don't fall out of love with each other when they remove their rings. While the rings symbolize their love for each other, that love is not somehow embodied in the ring itself. By way of contrast, a sacrament, such as the body and blood of Christ, actually embodies the reality symbolized by the bread and wine. This brings us to the distinction that we make between appearance and reality. It's a basic fact of life that things are not always what they seem. By way of example, the sun appears to move across the sky while the earth is stationary. We know, however, that the sun is stationary and the earth both rotates and orbits around the sun. Things are not what they seem. What's really happening is not always obvious on the surface. Appearance does not necessarily reflect reality. To explain how the consecrated bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Christ, while still retaining the physical properties of bread and wine, the Church has used the term transubstantiation. St. Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, gave this incisive summary. The whole substance of the bread is changed into the whole substance of Christ's body, and the whole substance of the wine into the whole substance of Christ's blood. Hence, this conversion may be designated by a name of its own, transubstantiation. Theologians in the 13th century endeavoured to explain transubstantiation by adopting the Aristotelian categories of substance and accidents. In a nutshell, accidents refer to what is perceived by the senses, that is, how something appears to us. Substance, coming from the Latin substare, to stand under, refers to the inner reality of anything, to its essence, to what it is most fundamentally. So accidents refer to what is perceived by the senses, substance refers to inner reality. Substance and accidents is another way of talking about appearance and reality. So in the case of the Eucharist, the accidents of bread and wine remain unchanged. As far as the senses can tell, the consecrated bread and wine still looks, smells, and tastes like bread and wine. However, according to the Council of Trent, the substance of the bread and wine does not remain, but is changed into Christ's body and blood. Only the appearance of bread and wine remains. Aquinas's hymn, Adoro te devote, expresses the Eucharistic presence in these words: I adore you devoutly, hidden deity, truly hidden beneath these appearances. My whole heart submits to you, and, contemplating you, surrenders completely. Sight, touch, taste are in you deceived, but hearing alone can be fully believed. I believe whatever the Son of God has said. There is nothing truer than this word of truth. Mircea Eliade, the Romanian historian of religion, called sacraments doors to the sacred. Joseph Martos, who adopted Doors to the Sacred as the title of his book on the historical introduction to the sacraments, offers this explanation. Sacraments in all religions function as doors to the sacred, that is, as invitations to religious experiences. Eliade calls such experiences hierophanies, coined from the Greek word hieros, meaning sacred or holy, and phino, meaning to manifest or reveal. A hierophany, then, is a manifestation of the sacred, an experienced revelation of the holy. Having such an experience is like entering into another dimension of space and time, and discovering a whole new world of meaning. The space is sacred space. The time is sacred time. The meaning is sacred meaning. According to psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist, all human beings feel a deep gravitational pull towards something ineffable. To be human, in my view, is to feel a deep gravitational pull towards something ineffable that, if we can just for once get beyond words and reasons, is a matter of experience, and to which we reach out silently, though not without misgivings. Something outside our conceptual grasp, but nonetheless present to us through intimations that come to us from a whole range of unfathomable experiences we call spiritual. He also says that nothing is less true than that we understand something only when we express it in language. On the contrary, language at times places a barrier between us and understanding, substitutes a crabbed expression for a living reality, and pretends to explain it away. McGilchrist maintains that the difficulty lies not in finding the right words, the difficulty lies in there being no right words. The Eucharist is truly ineffable. Despite all that theologians have written, there are ultimately no words that can adequately explain the presence of Christ among us in the Blessed Sacrament. Although words, at their very best, can only substitute a crabbed expression for a living reality, that doesn't mean that our attempt to understand is pointless, or that we are absolved from making the attempt to understand the presence of Christ among us in the Eucharist. With that in mind, let us turn to today's second reading from the letter to the Hebrews. We're reading from chapter 9, and the author is contrasting two sacrifices. We have the sacrifice offered yearly by the high priest on the Day of Atonement, the blood of goats and bull calves. He contrasts that sacrifice with the one perfect sacrifice that Christ has offered to God, his own blood. The annual feast of the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, as it's called in Hebrew, occurs on the 10th day of Tishri, the 7th month in the Jewish calendar. Today's reading begins at chapter 9, verse 11, but in the few verses prior to this, the author gives us some background information about the Day of Atonement. He begins by explaining the layout of the tent of meeting, the forerunner of what would eventually become the temple in Jerusalem. Firstly, there were two compartments in the tent. The first was called the Holy Place. The Holy Place is separated by a veil from what is called the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies held the Ark of the Covenant, which was plated all over with gold. On the top of the ark were two cherubim, overshadowing what was known as the Throne of Mercy or Mercy Seat. The Throne of Mercy or Mercy Seat was known as kaporet in the Hebrew, or to hilasterion in the Greek. No one was permitted to enter the Holy of Holies with the sole exception of the high priest, and then only on this one day of the year, the Day of Atonement. When the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, he sprinkled blood on the mercy seat. Biblical scholar Roland DeVoe explains the ritual of the Day of Atonement. The high priest offered a bull as a sacrifice for his own sinfulness and for that of his house, that is, of the Aaronite priesthood. Then he entered, the only occasion during the year, behind the veil which shut off the Holy of Holies, to incense the mercy seat, kaporet, and to sprinkle it with the bull's blood. Next he offered a goat for the sin of the people. He took the blood of the goat too behind the veil, where he sprinkled it over the mercy seat as he had sprinkled the bull's blood. Pope Benedict explains the significance of this sprinkling of blood. The holy place is sprinkled with the blood of the bull killed as a sin offering on the Day of Atonement. The thinking here is that the blood of the victim, into which all human sins are absorbed, actually touches the divinity and is thereby cleansed. And in the process, human beings, represented by the blood, are also purified through this contact with God. So, we have animal sacrifice, the blood of bulls and goats, which is repeated every year. It is repeated in a tent and eventually in the temple, which is made by human hands. The author of the letter to the Hebrews contrasts this with Jesus himself, who becomes both the priest offering the sacrifice as well as the sacrifice itself. He offers his own blood, that is, his own life. This is a perfect, final, once-for-all sacrifice that never needs to be repeated. It is offered in a greater and more perfect tent, the heavenly sanctuary. St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, puts it this way: God puts Jesus forth as the place of mercy, through his faithfulness by means of his blood. The word translated here as place of mercy is hilasterion, the mercy seat. Pope Benedict explains that it is not through the blood of animals touching a holy object that God and man are reconciled. In Jesus' passion, all the filth of the world touches the infinitely pure one, the soul of Jesus Christ, and hence the Son of God himself. While it is usually the case that anything unclean touching something clean renders it unclean, here it is the other way around. When the world, with all the injustice and cruelty that make it unclean, comes into contact with the infinitely pure one, then he, the pure one, is the stronger. Through this contact, the filth of the world is truly absorbed, wiped out, and transformed in the pain of infinite love. Let us now turn to today's Gospel, Mark's account of the institution of the Eucharist. Mark tells us that it was the first day of unleavened bread when the Passover lamb was sacrificed. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Hag HaMazot, occurs on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, and it celebrates the barley harvest. But the Feast of Passover was also celebrated on the 15th day of Nisan. So in the course of time, these two feasts merged into one. Mark tells us that it was at this time that the Passover lamb was sacrificed. This gives us an interpretive key to understanding the meaning of Jesus' passion and death. Jesus chose Passover. He could have chosen Pentecost, or Tabernacles, or even the Day of Atonement, but he didn't. He chose Passover as the time of his death. His death inaugurated a new Passover, not from slavery in Egypt, but freedom from sin and death. In today's Gospel, the Jerusalem Bible translation simply says, "and as they were eating," but that translation misses an important point. The Greek verb used here, anakaimenon, means reclining. So a more literal translation would read, "and while they were reclining and eating." And why is that important? Well, the ancients sat up, as we do, for ordinary meals, but on festive occasions, such as Passover, they reclined. In other words, Mark is emphasizing the fact that this is a Passover meal. The ancient ritual of Passover involves eating unleavened bread and drinking wine. In fact, there are 4 toasts during the meal. And during this final meal, Jesus takes a cup of wine at one of these toasts and says, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant, which is to be poured out for many." What does the word covenant refer to here? A covenant is a formal contract between two parties, especially between God and human beings. There are mutual promises and obligations on each side. The Hebrew word for covenant is berit. The word for covenant in the Greek of the New Testament is diatheke. Those of you who are married entered into a solemn covenant when you married, and there are terms to that covenant. Before making their marriage vows, the couple are publicly asked, "Have you come here freely and without reservation to give yourselves to each other in marriage? Will you love and honour each other as man and wife for the rest of your lives? And will you accept children lovingly from God and bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church?" The word covenant captures the heart of Israel's religious beliefs. The people are bound to an unbreakable covenant with their God, and they owe God worship, fidelity, and obedience. God pledges himself to be Israel's personal protector and helper. In a nutshell, I will be your God, and you will be my people. This brings us to today's first reading. The book of Exodus tells the story of God entering into a covenant with his people at Mount Sinai. We're told that Moses put all of the commands of the Lord into writing, and early the next morning he builds an altar at the foot of the mountain, Mount Sinai, with 12 standing stones. The altar symbolizes God, and the 12 standing stones symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses then directs certain young Israelites to offer holocausts and to immolate bullocks to the Lord as communion sacrifices. Half of the blood from the slaughtered bullocks is kept in basins. The other half is cast on the altar. And then Moses reads the book of the covenant to the people, and again they reply, "We will observe all that the Lord has decreed. We will obey." Moses then takes the blood that had been kept in basins and casts it towards the people. As he does it, he says, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you, containing all these rules." Let's pause there for a moment and try to understand what is happening here, because it is so alien to our culture. We probably feel squeamish at the thought of being sprinkled with blood. At the time of Moses, however, and indeed for us as well, blood is identified with life, and all life belongs to God. Casting blood on the altar recognizes this, because the altar symbolizes God. Sprinkling blood on the people joins them to the blood splashed on the altar. A union has been created from this blood relationship. And the blood also symbolizes the fact that this covenant is a matter of life and death. Think of the ancient ritual that exists in many cultures, in which two people cut themselves to draw blood, and then allow their blood to mingle. They are then bound together as blood brothers. So as Moses casts blood over the people, he says, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you." Let's now fast forward to the Last Supper. Jesus and his disciples have gathered to celebrate Passover, the annual celebration of the exodus from slavery in Egypt. During one of the toasts that are part of that meal, Jesus says something extraordinary. As he takes a cup of wine, he says, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant, which is to be poured out for many." That takes us right back to the original Exodus. Two covenants, both sealed in blood. Each time we gather to celebrate the Eucharist, we enter into the mystery of Jesus' saving death and resurrection. We open our lives to the power of his one perfect sacrifice that takes away the sin of the world. And we gather to renew our commitment to the new and everlasting covenant that was sealed through the blood of our crucified and risen Lord.